Right, welcome Buddy and welcome everybody to our Spa Professional Skilled Coaching session. So today I'm going to tell you about Amanda. Amanda, how do you say your surname properly?
Al-Masri.
Al-Masri, okay, I thought so. So let me tell you a little bit about Amanda because she's got quite an impressive CV. Well, I think it's super impressive. So Amanda is an internationally known wellness leader. And before returning to consulting, she was Equinox VP of Spa, where she drove the overall strategy and execution of all 100 plus, I mean, that's over 100 spas, and assisted with the launch of Equinox hotels. I mean, that is just a mind-blowing task all on its own. Prior to joining Equinox, Amanda headed Starwood Hotel and Resort Spa Division as their Global Director of Spa Development and Operations, responsible for Starwood Spa brands. And here we go, another portfolio. I absolutely have no idea how you manage this, Amanda, but it's 450 spas worldwide. So, wow, I mean, talk about listening to a total expert with a wealth of experience today. She has also held various leadership roles at renowned operators and consultants. Raison d'etre, I don't know if anybody knows that group, I do, which is great. And there's also Recent Spa. Supporting her work experience, Amanda has a Master of Management in Hospitality, so that's pretty cool, from Cornell School of Hotel Administration. And of course, she's a sought-after speaker at wellness industry events because we've sought her to come and speak to us today, of course. So Amanda, I know that you are super busy. So I want to start off, and I'm going to end off by saying it, but I want to start off by saying thank you for giving us this time. And I'm going to hand over to you, and everybody is as excited as I am to listen to your wealth of knowledge about a topic that everybody on this call is super passionate about.
Well, thank you. I'm super excited. So let me get the presentation going that I'm going to share with you all before I start talking and get distracted. Bear with me. And here we are. So thank you so much for the introduction and the opportunity to speak with all of you. And, I know we're coming from all over the world. I know that many of you may be managing various types of spas, whether it's a day spa or a hotel spa, a salon. There's a lot of different people coming to this particular table. So I want as a goal for us to have a really broad conversation. And I really do invite you to ask questions, raise your hand, chat, or even speak as I'm going, because, especially when we're talking about numbers and finance, what I don't want is for me to be talking a mile a minute as I do with my sort of New York cadence, and for you to not get as much out of it because you have a question early on. So first off, here's what I want to talk about. The KPI, key performance indicators. I think we're all at this point, especially if you're joining a call like this, you're probably familiar with key performance indicators. You're probably calculating them on a regular basis. Hopefully you're tracking them. What I want to make sure I'm talking about in this presentation is making the best use of your time that you spend with these KPIs and using them for strategic management. So that's our objective here. The other piece, and this comes from, having managed quite a lot of spas over the years, is often we find that this feels like busy work to many people, or it becomes overwhelming, or there's so much information or data to sort through that it ends up not being helpful at all. And we want to make sure that any time you spend, as I say, on KPIs and any reporting really does yield results. So I want to share some best practices and also talk about how you make these statistics more than just for yourself, right? More than just for, information you're calculating and using to make business decisions. How do you use it to be more transparent with your team, owners, general managers, making sure that this information finds its way to better communication. So I'm going to start by talking about secrets to success. And, that's a little bit of an simplification. But what I want to share with that is, there's good ways to use these and good ways to spend your time, and then maybe some less successful. So I want to talk through that. I will talk a little bit about some key KPIs and key sort of buckets of KPIs that we can and should be looking at. But as I said at the beginning, my goal isn't really to talk you through how you calculate these. I assume that you're probably already doing that. The biggest piece is maybe understanding groups of KPIs and how they work together and some key takeaways. But really, I want to move into this fourth point, the strategic management through KPIs and how you share them with your team. So I've gotten a beautiful introduction already. I'll quickly share, the Hutchinson group that I work with is a group that specializes in a variety of things, recruitment and hospitality and marketing services and consulting as well. So we do a lot. We have a really great team. And I will breeze through my own bio because I was so well introduced already. So I'll jump right into what we want to talk about. So first off, defining what a KPI is. There's a business school definition, which is what you see on your screen now, but really more simply, it's a way for you to track and capture data and keep track of them on your path to goals. So, I don't think that that's a terribly innovative concept. I think everybody at this point is probably using them. Let's talk more about how we use them well. So first off, the data is key, right? You've got a lot of information more than likely, right? You've got the most basic, right? Your financial reporting. How are you on your P&L doing in terms of revenue, costs, and overall profitability? But hopefully as well, many of you are working with software systems like Booker or MindBody or SpaSoft or Book for Time. And there's some really robust reporting that comes out of that. But the other thing, and I do often think that this gets overlooked as a KPI, are more what I call soft metrics, right? Not necessarily numbers or not necessarily something you pull off of your financial reporting or your point of sale system. It's things like turnover and staff satisfaction, things that are certainly indicators to success and will, sort of influence how well your business performs. But beyond data, right? Of course, there's a lot of data. You have to have the right data. And the other piece of this is sometimes it's not, and it used to be a problem in the past, right? Just not having enough data to do anything with. Now we have too much. And it's coming from everywhere. We've got benchmarks that we can look at and reports. And sometimes, especially if you're less comfortable with finance, this causes what we call analysis paralysis, right? It's just like, it's too much. You're too overwhelmed and you just sort of set it aside and say, you know what, we're doing fine without this. And we just kind of don't even look at KPIs or we're not using them properly. The other piece is making sure that the data you have is good. And so what that means is your system is configured correctly and that you are collecting the data that allows you to make some of the KPI decisions and track the KPIs in ways that you want. I'll give you for instance, I have a client. We were trying to, as a strategic goal, increase the number of hotel guests that were coming to the spa. And we had external guests and hotel guests. And we really had no way to measure that because of the configuration on our spa software system didn't allow us to classify the guest type, meaning if somebody booked, we didn't say they were a hotel guest or a day spa guest, we just booked them in. So there was really no way to differentiate on that for that KPI the type of guest it was. So we had to go back in and change how we configured the system. We changed the fields that you had to fill out to book an appointment, and then we solved that data problem. And I would assume that pretty much every operation has one of these types of problems. And if it's something you really want to track, it really is worth getting the data right. And then here's the least pleasant one. Simply tracking KPIs, there's generally some homework you need to do first. I'm surprised. Actually, I'm not surprised. I'm always hopeful that clients I work with or spas that I've managed would have a budget. In many cases, people do because they're part of a larger organization and are forced into that budgeting process, or they're simply doing it because they really are on top of things. But having a budget allows us to figure out what the larger goal is. Here's the performance we expect to have. And then from there, we should be setting strategic goals. Obviously, there are strategic goals that are not financially oriented. But for the purposes of this, setting those strategic goals allows us to figure out, okay, we want to do this. What's a KPI that will help us track our progress? So in order to have KPIs, you need to know what those goals are. And then do the work of making sure that you have, as I said, the data to get you those KPIs. And probably the most important thing is you need to narrow the field of KPIs. There are thousands that you can calculate, and I'll even share a very small sampling today, and it's literally hundreds. So, not every spa will need or want to use the same KPIs. There's a couple that are probably, significant enough that most people will want to use them at least, to track, monthly. But it might not even be the same KPIs from year to year that are going to be valuable if your strategic goals change. Finally, know your audience. What do you want to know? Who are you trying to talk to? And it may be a different group of KPIs depending on who you're trying to talk to. So for example, in a hotel spa environment, you may have KPIs that you want as yourself, as a manager or an owner. But if you're talking to an owner or a general manager, they're going to have different types of questions, and they may be better spoken to with certain KPIs than the ones you're tracking yourself. So knowing that you may need to track something that necessarily isn't as important to you, but that is helpful for you to share out later. And then the biggest piece, just like anything, especially in operations, we're all operators here. We know what it's like to run a spa. And we know that you can spend an awful lot of time just keeping your head above water, putting out fires, and being present with your team and with your guest. And I understand and appreciate that fully. But what I would say is, I know there are a lot of things that call for your attention, email, reporting. But if you make this a part of your routine, that's how these things end up getting done. I think where I see people getting really overwhelmed with tracking KPIs is when they don't do it for a full month, and all of a sudden they're scrambling to find information. They're scrambling to do the calculations. They're scrambling to do their dailies, their weeklies, their monthlies. All you have to do is set aside 2 minutes at some point in the day to record your daily. And, often you can just make everything tally up so that you have monthly results and weekly results. All it takes is just a plan. And the other piece is, having this historical data, having KPIs tracked over a period of time, and we'll talk about this, is probably one of the most valuable tools. So if you do have something that's a template that you use, and even if it's not the most robust or it's not the fanciest, just having a way to see results over time is going to be a huge help for you. And that's this one, keep track, right? You have a template, and I'll share with you the templates I've personally used, right? They're not fancy. And in many ways, it's helpful if they're not. And then finally, and this is the big one, and this is what we're going to talk about for the bulk of this presentation, you really need to follow through with KPIs. And what I mean with that is these don't do anyone any good if you track them and then they don't ever get interpreted. You don't ever try and understand them. You don't ever dig in, and you don't use them to progress your goals or to make business cases. And we'll talk about how to do both of those things. And finally, with KPIs, and I'm always stunned by this, and some of this is, it might be expectation of owners or other leaders that you report into, but these are not trade secrets. And in fact, this is one of the best tools you have to share out information with your team. Certainly not everything needs to go out, right? Things like compensation or, sort of achievements don't always need to be shared, especially if they're not the most positive. But this is a really great tool to share success. And there's so many people, when I go in and I speak to teams and I spend time in operation, that, they say, oh, I know the spa is doing so great. I just don't know why they don't do X. And oftentimes, maybe the spa isn't doing as great as they want, or maybe they don't have all the information. And I'll talk a little bit about this later, but, it's helpful for you to share where you are holistically, right? Here's how we performed last month. Here's how we performed over the year. And here's our projects. Here's where we are. And here's our plan for next year. You're mentioning this to me as something that you'd like to do. Well, here's the metrics that we have to reach in order to do that. Or here's why we're not doing it, but we're going to do it later or next year or never. But here's why. And it helps make things a bit more cut and dried, a little bit easier for people to understand than just saying, yes, we're doing great, or, oh, we're having a tough year, or, oh, COVID hit us hard. Well, how did it hit you hard? What things are going well? What things are not? So this is the piece that sometimes I do share, really stepped through how we calculate some key KPIs. And my impression from at least the names that I see that I know on this presentation, I don't think anybody needs help calculating these. So I'm going to spend very little time on this, but I'll just run through generally sort of key buckets and how we work with these. So the most important, even if you don't have a spa software system, you probably have an accounting system or an accountant or bookkeeper that can at least give you a profit and loss statement. And ultimately, this is the best snapshot of your business. And this is sort of the number one source of information. And sometimes, as I mentioned, you also have a budget. And a 5-year pro forma I put on here because if you're starting a new business or a new business unit, or you're markedly changing your business in some way, you might do a 5-year pro forma. It's a forecast for new businesses. And so with your profit and loss statement, it's the most straightforward metric, right? Are we making money? Or are we losing money? How much are we making? How much are we spending? What are some key costs? And this is, when I sit down with a spa or somebody talks to me about their success or challenges that they're having, this is always a starting point. And I'm sure all of you do this. It's a place to sort of understand the toggles of your business, meaning if X happens, Y is the result. And we look at KPIs to try and better understand our results on the profit and loss statement. So of course, we're looking at profitability, right? How much money makes it all the way down to the bottom as net operating income? And there's some other key things that I look at that help me understand if things are skewed. So you'll probably have a grasp of how much your labor is as a percentage of revenue. And that number goes up and down depending where in the world you are, how you structure your compensation. So that's why I say historically, it's probably more important for you to look at yourself or maybe a close comp set for some of these numbers. So let's say we're looking at labor as 40 to 60% of total revenue. If that number skyrockets or drops, we want to look into why historically that has changed. What are the reasons? Have we changed prices and it's worked? Have we lost team members and we're constrained in terms of the revenue we can make? Trying to dig into all of these. So these are some of the big pieces. And often it's looking at the bigger cost or the bigger line items. And the budget, again, I mentioned that this is not always a tool I see unless you're super well organized or you are part of an organization that does have a budgeting process. But this is sort of the next really big step in sort of the large umbrella type of KPI process that I work through. And really what we're doing with the budget is setting goals, realistic goals, hopefully. And why I even bring this up is because this is where KPIs can really help, right? Understanding how to take this really big budget, which is, sort of our ultimate goal. We're going to make X amount of money or have this amount of profitability and working backwards. So yes, we want that result. How do we make bite-sized goals of getting there and tracking that progress? And that's how KPIs end up being really important for us, right? We figure out, okay, we want to increase our revenue by 25%. We're going to do it by adding services. We're going to do, we're going to try and do more business, meaning we're going to have better utilization of our therapists, better utilization of our treatment rooms. And we're going to try and make a business case for new equipment for services that we'd like to implement and that we think will drive revenue. And all of those, again, are KPIs and they can be measured by KPIs and help keep us on track. So there's some key KPIs that you should be looking at. And again, like I said, everybody's going to have their own because everybody has their own strategic goals. And ideally, a lot of these, rather than having to calculate them by hand or use a formula in Excel, a lot of these can be calculated directly through SPA software. You can pull them from SPA software reports. And it's everything from treatment statistics to treatment room occupancy, therapist utilization. And we really want to try and dig into sort of the key variables that drive your performance, right? The revenue, so treatments and sales, and then looking at costs. And then some of the softer variables, that I mentioned, like mystery shoppers or staff retention, things like that. So treatment statistics, I think, are probably the cleanest and easiest to understand as KPIs. I'm sure you're all using this and looking at this at the end of at least every month, I hope. And it's things like breakdown by service category. It's cost of sales per service. It's the number of services that you upgrade or have retail sales attached to. There's untold numbers of these. But what I do want to share is, again, there's different benchmarks depending on your market. There's different benchmarks depending on the type of spa, whether you're urban, whether you're resort. Everything is very different for all of you, even within the same marketplace sometimes. So again, I want to say that you shouldn't consider yourself, as you're looking at things like benchmarks, good or bad, because the truth of the matter is it depends, right? I'm so often asked for what should we be doing? And, it sounds like a hedge, but the reality is there's no should, right? It's better attached to what your budget or expectations are than a sort of a benchmark in a vacuum. So when we look at treatment stats, it tells me a number of things. And as a consultant, KPIs are one of my most valued tools, right? Because it's a very straightforward, emotionless exercise, right? So let's talk about something like a treatment menu. If I look and I see, okay, we're looking at the menu, there's 35 services, and 3 services on the menu comprise 80% of your sales. And that tells me that the menu is probably not necessarily too large, but we probably need to look at how we're marketing it. We need to look at if it's hitting the right targets with our guests. And maybe it's a booking issue. So that's where we start digging in. Again, I think all these are pretty straightforward. Let's focus on moving through to the strategic management aspect of things. Sales are also a huge part. So we talked about treatment, that's our main revenue, but digging into maybe a little bit more tactical sales calculations, diving into revenue. How much is your average guest spend? What is our retail percentage? What is our retail sales as a percentage of revenue or number of checks? All of these are pretty standard KPIs, and they help us understand how we're doing and how we could do better. And then we also look at perishable inventory. So when we think about how we make money, we're always talking about sales and services, but there's a whole other side of this that we see in hotel rooms and that we see in even food and beverage, which is perishable inventory, whether it's a room night that goes unused or a seat hour that goes unused in restaurants. Spas have the same, right? So if you don't sell that room for either a half an hour, an hour, or however long, that's time you'll never get back to sell. So measuring of that is something that happens, and it's something that gets tracked sort of at a global level. And it is a statistic that we do see that is interesting to owners and to general managers, particularly if you're at a hotel spa. And it is interesting for us to track within our own spas to see how we're doing, how we're performing relative to ourselves. And this is the calculation. In many cases, I'm finding that some of the major point of sale systems don't actually calculate treatment room occupancy, which I'm trying to work on. But it's a pretty straightforward calculation, right? Just the number of treatment hours you saw in a day versus the number available in all of your treatment rooms, less turn time. And then another good hotel statistic, and I won't spend too much time because I know many of you are day spas, but it's the capture ratio, meaning how many people do you get in the spa from the hotel? And that helps us understand how much value the spa creates for the hotel and vice versa. So again, I'll sort of page through this because again, I don't want to spend too much time on these KPIs themselves. But I do want to share that, again, not every one of these KPIs needs to be financially oriented. A mystery shopper, for example, is a wonderful way to, one, track your guest experience, right? You're not just selling a treatment room experience with just the service and the service provider. You're hopefully collectively selling an experience to the guest. And in many ways, that's how we show added value and how we can justify perhaps higher prices. So keeping track of that experience holistically from the point of, booking all the way through point of sale and maybe even post-service follow-up is really important. And this is something that often gets overlooked. Obviously, there's companies that do this like Coil and LQA and Forbes, but even if you're not part of an organization that leverages that, you can do this yourself. And in fact, if anybody's interested, I have like a 10-question mystery shopper survey that I use, and you can do that as a spa manager, right? You should obviously be skill testing and mystery shopping your own spa regularly, but it is something that you should have people from outside coming to do. And it gives you great statistics, allows you to check in with your team, and it gives a great talking point as you're talking about, sort of training targets and things that you should be doing to elevate your service. As I said, there's thousands and thousands of KPIs. I'm sure there's many that I've not even shown on these slides, let alone talked about. But know that in many ways, what it is almost is immaterial, right? It's what you do with it. And that's really what I want to talk about here. So first and foremost, I'm sure many of you have heard about yield management, also called revenue management. And this is something that started with rental cars, and the idea started with rental cars and airlines and sort of non-transparent, rather opaque pricing, right? Different pricing at different times. And it really evolved into really proactive management and making sure that you're selling the right inventory to the right customer at the right time at the right price. And some of that is directly relevant to spa, meaning, you certainly can make sure you're selling the right services at the right time. The right price is a little trickier. Many of us are not using flexible pricing, meaning you might have weekend, weekday, or high season, low season pricing, but you're not pricing that same massage at different rates, like surge pricing during the day. But what we can do, and what hopefully we use KPIs for on a proactive basis, right, throughout the day, is that you have sort of a dashboard, whether it's a physical dashboard, which I do know some spa software systems do have and people do deploy, or you're just periodically checking in, and it allows you to make informed real-time decisions. Obviously, you have a gut feeling, especially if you've been operating a spa for a long time or you're the owner. But sometimes our gut feeling isn't always accurate or as attuned to the business as possible. So having a KPI, and an example is therapist utilization. Having that as a KPI that you look at regularly allows you to make some adjustments to your schedule, more than just balancing the schedule, but trying to make sure that nobody's booking for example, 90-minute service over your highest demand period, because you won't yield as much from that 90 minutes as you would if you did a 30-minute service and a 60-minute service. So it's a tough thing to do. Obviously, if you've made a booking, you can't cancel the booking. So some of this is, yes, you managing your schedule, managing your people, managing your roster, but some of it is also a training piece, right? So standing there in shop floor, coaching your team about how you make the best use of your schedule and your team and the bookings, and how you're taking those bookings. So a lot of this is training and active shop floor management, which I'm sure many of you are doing. The other piece, and I mentioned this, is what I'm often told is the busy work, right? Daily, weekly, and monthly reporting. And I have this routine, when I was managing larger groups of spas, I was able to say, this is what we do. And now that I have clients, sometimes, I say, this is what we should do. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But what I do say is writing things down has a lot of advantages. One, as I mentioned, tracking historically, even if it's not fancy, is incredibly important. But the other piece is it creates accountability, and it makes sure that you can share them out easily, and it makes it a part of your routine. It forces you to do it. It's a blank spot if you didn't fill it in, as opposed to, saying, oh yeah, I checked that, it looked fine. So when you do have these reports, and I'll show you ones that I've used, and like I said, they're not fancy. And in fact, I've had fancy ones and I've always sort of reverted back to kind of a boring Excel spreadsheet. But the next steps of after you write them down are kind of what matters. So more than anything, once you write them down, and I'm guilty of this sometimes, I write it down and then I kind of don't look at it because then it's done. Make sure you unpack it, right? Understand what that number is and why it is. If it was a different result than you typically get, why is that? Is it just a mistake, right? Did we not close out correctly overnight? Did we have call outs and we didn't have as many therapists as we needed on the schedule? What helped us get those results? Why did we have a really great day on a Thursday when normally Thursdays are slow days? Trying to understand that and use that information and interpret it. Then the next step is the action. What are we going to do about it? Whether that action is immediate, oh my gosh, we need to call in more therapists, or oh my gosh, I think we need to send home 3 people because our schedule is really light today. Great. But it doesn't always have to be immediate. It can be part of the larger strategic vision. My gosh, I've noticed that overall our Tuesdays are a lot slower than they used to be. Here's why I think it is. Here's what I'd like to do about it. And especially if it has a spend or a price tag attached to it, then you might need to do what we're going to talk about a little later, which is build out a business case. Again, I've heard so often, this is busy work. I don't have time to do a report. And to some degree, I agree, right? We don't want to create a lot of extra work. The goal of writing down these statistics is to spend about 2 to 3 minutes every day just doing the statistics. And that just comes from practice of knowing where you get the stats from. And then the report itself for the weekly should take about 10 to 15 minutes. And the monthly, we want to spend a little bit longer, right? 30 minutes to an hour, because we really want to talk about, sort of crunch those numbers, understand what's happened, understand, what our goals are for the next month. So I want to show you some examples, like I said, of what this can look like. So this is, I use this, I want to say at 4 or 5 different spas. And it is my daily and weekly tracking, right? So you can see Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It totals at the end, and then it has a running total. You see my weeks along the bottom. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but you can see the weeks at the bottom. So really straightforward, nothing fancy by any stretch. And what I will say is these are the statistics that were important to this particular spa. They changed from spa to spa. What I rarely did, because I did want to keep track of historical information, I rarely took away this core group of KPIs. If I wanted to track something specific, I usually added on. And all of this, my routine, talking about routines, was at the close of business when we had the closing team writing notes in the sort of the book that we kept with notes for the opening crew. They printed out the 5 or 6 reports that I needed. So I had them ready, waiting to go. So the MOD could see them if it wasn't me. And the spa manager, me, could see them and use them to do this, this tracking. And once technology caught up, I was able to put this on a shared drive so everybody could see it. And before that was a possibility, I would often post this daily on a pegboard. And all this told us is this is how we're doing. This is our performance. This is real life. This is the outcome of what we're all doing when we come to work. And similarly, I had a monthly statistic. It looked a bit different than the weekly for a variety of reasons. It doesn't have to. It can just be a running total of that weekly that you had. And this is the weekly report. Like I said, 5 to 10 minutes. Doesn't have to be full sentences. Doesn't even have to be spell checked unless you're sharing it with the general manager or an owner. what I think is important to note here is you're talking about each area of your business. And sometimes that could be the full business. It could be things that you're particularly focused on. It could be things that you interact with other stakeholders like marketing team on or sales team. But you're talking about current results and then what you're going to do about it. And it's forcing that conversation about, how do you take the next step? What is the plan? What is the short-term plan? What's the long-term plan? And the monthly report, as I said, is a bit longer, and it does more focus on the strategic and longer range goals and visions and strategy. But again, if it is just for you and you don't find this works for you, that's fine. You make it shorter. But what I can't underscore enough, make sure you force yourself to sit down and write it, because even if you never look at it again, hopefully you do, but even if you don't, the act of writing and taking time and setting aside headspace and time for this will make sure that it is meaningful for you. Make sure that you actually are thinking things through as you probably should be doing, but often don't because of how busy operations can be. The other piece, and this is hopefully something you're doing when you're making business decisions, but I'm asking you to be even more intentional about it. So making business back plans and decisions, sometimes people do look at the financial impact, and sometimes we don't. We assume it'll work out. And sometimes these are very small decisions. Sometimes they're big. Small, like buying a piece of equipment, big, like, expanding one arm or vertical of your business. And there's always a financial impact, right? Because we all are in business to make money. So we really do need to understand this side. And I know we're running short of time, so I have an example, but I'll talk to you through the outcome as opposed to sort of walking you through the actual calculation. So the example would be, you want to buy a piece of equipment that takes a multi-purpose treatment room into a specialty treatment room. So it's something that comes up constantly, and especially in consulting as we're looking at building new spas or updating existing. So the pros are, it creates unique service offerings, creates a point of difference for the spa. It's something that people are asking for. It will engage the service providers in a new way, but we want to understand the financial impact. So how much will it cost? How much treatment room revenue will we lose if you can't do other services? How much business do we think, as a delta will we generate with this new technology? So those are all things we consider. And, what I can say is as I've shown here, there's quite a lot of ways to look at it, right? You're just looking at the pure cost of the machine versus how much you'll get as a per service revenue for it. Your return on investment might look, pretty rosy, right? 100 services if you look at the full cost of the treatment. But if you look at the actual margin of that treatment, right? Let's say you're only making 53 or probably even less per service on it. It's a lot more services. Certainly at some point you're going to pay it back. So, you have to look at that as well. But we also need to look at how much potential business we stand to lose if we put this in and take away other treatment, other opportunities for treatment. And, if we look at this, and I've got to move the chat window because I can't see it, it's almost 130 grand that we could stand to lose. It's not a full story either, right? So we don't know how much business we're losing because we don't have this particular service, or how much potential PR opportunity there is when we bring this in. So there's a lot of different variables, but the main thrust of why I'm sharing this with you is you have to at least start here and understand the impact. My impression is if you're on this call, you're probably not making decisions in a vacuum without information, but really working it through properly and having a clear understanding of all the pros and cons, including financial outcomes, are really important. And finally, sharing KPIs with your team. I talked a little bit about this already, but what I often find, and particularly where you're taking over businesses maybe that have had a rough time, I'm sure many of you are, I hope that you're not, but many of you and many clients that we work with have had obviously a rough time post-COVID. Everything is coming back, but your team hopefully is seeing that you're starting to rebuild, you're starting to have some successes, and hopefully you didn't have any downturn during COVID, but things happen, whether it's COVID or something else, there's always peaks and troughs in our business. So, it's helpful to share out with the team. And transparent sharing of information is often something, that has an enormous impact on staff. Yes, engagement and loyalty, but just total motivation overall, right? Understanding that people want to be part of the team, hopefully when they come to work. Sharing information about the performance of the work they're doing, it feels, pretty straightforward and kind of common sense, but I'm shocked at how many people don't. I've had a conversation in the last couple of days where, I was having a conversation about a treatment menu with a head of aesthetics, and she had never seen any of the treatment statistics, didn't know how things were selling. She had a general sense because obviously she saw our schedule every day, but didn't really know how things were selling, was totally surprised and blown away by how it really broke out. So it tells me two things. One, our gut isn't always right. And two, don't be afraid to share information. People may say, oh, I'm afraid of numbers, or, oh, my team doesn't really want or feel an interest in finance. And all it is sharing the right information with those people. I also talked about contextualizing your decisions and priorities. So often, especially if you're making, big changes or have big strategic goals, it means putting off other things. And things that might be really important to certain people. So let's say, your focus is on one thing, but there's, a group that has been asking for, let's say, a new treatment table in one room for the last 3 years. And it's just one of those things that gnaws at them. They're in that treatment room every day. It affects their day-to-day. They don't understand why we can't buy a, $3,000 treatment table when we're doing all these other projects. It's showing why that is. It's talking through, key points of, here's the decision, here's why we're making it, here's where your decision or where your ask falls and sort of the level of priorities, and being really open and honest and clear. It might not be the information they want to hear, might not be the story they want told, but at the end of the day, that transparency at least is honest. The other piece is, and hopefully you're doing, feedback sessions with your team. Hopefully you're doing performance reviews. Having these KPIs at the ready and tracking them regularly allows you to have more productive sessions, right? It takes the emotion out of things that can be, particularly with therapists, emotional. And it also helps everybody align around those same goals. And truthfully, this is not my pearl of wisdom, but whatever you focus on is what grows, right? So if you're focused on one thing and you're constantly talking about your progress, you're constantly talking about KPIs associated with that goal, people will start paying attention to that, right? Whether it's intentional or not, whatever you're focusing on with your team and what you're talking to your team about, that's the thing that they're going to start focusing on as well. And that's how you sort of get that team bought in on goals or get that team working towards that goal. So that's the presentation. I want to make sure I open up time for questions, even though we only have about 6 minutes. And I'm going to open the chat window.
Love it, love it, love it. So I have a question, Amanda, quite an important one that I think a few people will be interested in the answer. On the yield management slide that you had up, you did mention charging different prices at different times and so on. Yeah. So does that mean that there is no set price list available online? So when somebody looks for a massage for 60 minutes, there is no set price. Is that how it's working at the moment? Or
no? So what I would say, well, there's a couple of different ways to approach it. I don't think there's many people doing things that way. I think we will start to see that happening, especially sort of where it's a technologized interaction, right? You're booking a massage through like a Zeal app. However, there are ways to do this. And I think what I would say is the most basic way of doing this is weekday pricing, which many of you may have, or high season, low season. What I do know is from a surge pricing perspective, You can do more of a prefix menu, meaning during, let's use Valentine's Day as a US based example. You know, that was last week, right? I've worked in businesses where it was so busy that we wanted to make sure, one, that we were yield managing the time that we had, right? We extended hours, but we also wanted to make sure that we weren't selling unprofitable services. We were really trying to keep things nice and tight and as revenue rich as possible. And so saying we do these 3 services or this package, and those are your options. And that allowed us to sort of charge what we wanted or what we felt was reasonable, and made sure that we were making the best use of some really valuable time. And that can be game day pricing or holidays or whatever peak periods that you have, if that makes any sense.
It does make sense. I'm not, I was having this very same discussion with a client of ours today, is that when a consumer sees that there is 2 sets of pricing, it doesn't sit well with everybody. It really doesn't. So I'm almost inclined to say, and I don't know if it's the right train of thought, but we are going to put it to the test. I'm almost inclined to say, let's have our absolute maximum price that we can charge for that service. And that is the price that we will advertise. And then when we need to fill the slower gaps, that's when we either add value or say, right, for the next 3 days, this service is $100 less. Instead of having 2 different sets of pricing. So, like, I'm glad that you said there's no 100% set way yet and that people are playing around with it, because we are finding it's not a challenge, but it is a bit of a challenge, like people almost turn up their noses like, oh, why if I come here on a Saturday, do I have to pay more than if I come here on a Thursday?
Yeah. And as you say, there's going to be market by market specificity to this. I think there's some markets that have it's now commonplace. And I can think of a handful of clients for whom it wasn't even a question. Like, that's what the market was doing. That was what the comp set is doing. And the market just happens to accept it. And in other places, it feels like a kick in the shins, right? That you want to go on a weekend and it's, 20, 30% higher. What I would say is, your strategy makes a lot of sense. And that's kind of the direction a lot of people that have a concern about this move to. What I think you've also mentioned there without, talking about, what a brilliant move that was, is you don't want to lean on discounting. It's almost worse to say, we'll rely on discounting as opposed to having 2 sets of pricing, because that makes guests price sensitive or makes them wait for promotions in order to make bookings. So you have to sort of pick your poison in that particular scenario. And as you say, add value, perhaps. Maybe you're looking at instead of a 60-minute service, you're looking at a 90-minute service as a sort of a value add, or a gift with purchase or an upgrade, things like that.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. So does anybody else have any questions? So somebody's asking if you don't mind sharing your mystery shopper checklist. I mean, if it is confidential information, you don't have to, but if it isn't, it would be great. Maybe you could, if it isn't, you can send it to us and then we will farm it out.
Absolutely.
And people are asking about some of the sheets that you were showing, if you want to share them. So if you're happy to, great. If not, Amanda, we all fully understand that that some items are not to be shared, but just showed, right? So Samantha's saying, my director wants to charge international. Yeah, my director wants to charge international guests more than local guests.
I love that.
On that.
Interesting. So, it's hard. I guess my question would be, is it local versus, sort of out of town guests? And that is something that there are certainly people doing. So I have one project right now that we have sort of a locals discount and then sort of a standard price that everyone pays, and locals on Monday through Thursday have a 20% discount, for example. And that's kind of how we work it. I mean, what I would say is framing it positively as opposed to sort of a tax on being, non-local feels not ideal. But I think I do understand, especially if it's a leisure guest that maybe is coming during more set or peak periods. I do think that there's some call for that. I think it has to be framed in a positive way, as opposed to, we're going to tax you for not being local.
Yeah, I thought about calling it local loyalty.
Yeah. And you can make that, in many cases, the demand periods for those are opposite, meaning when a local audience is interested in coming is not when that external audience is most interested in booking. So like I said, that Monday through Thursday pricing is something that I've deployed a number of times, and it doesn't even have to be a 20% discount. And it could even be, and I've done this too, it could be a separate menu, right? So it's completely opaque, meaning it's not like for like services. So it's really hard to know that you're not charging, that you're charging differently.
Okay. Oh, I love that. Any other questions? Anybody? Come, we've got Amanda. We've gone over about 2 minutes, but I'm sure another 3 minutes will be fine, or 4 minutes. You have her here. Ask away. Anybody? Excellent presentation and very useful for managers of day spas and hotels too. Yes, I fully agree with you. That was fabulous. Absolutely awesome. I've got a question to everybody in the chat or in the room. Is how many of you are doing KPIs? So here comes the trickish question. How many of you are doing your KPIs weekly? Because I know that a lot of you are doing them monthly. How many of you are doing KPIs weekly? Because this is something I learned new today and I'm loving the sound of it. Okay, so Anna says, learned some nice, new, interesting things, and great to hear how well we are analyzing our spas that we work with. Oh, that's nice. So how many of you are doing your KPIs weekly? Come, get into the chat box and let us know, everyone, because if you're not, that means that there's huge value in today's presentation, because that's something to take away, right? Make our workload and our burden easier. Instead of tackling this in a month, once a month, is we run the KPIs once a week, and then I want to even narrow it further down to once a day. So that's awesome. Nobody's owning up. Okay, I wonder why.
Well, but yeah, know that you will not be in the minority. And Marissa, you've made the important point, which is if you do it daily or you do it weekly, it really does take the onus off at the end of the month of having to sit down and feeling like an insurmountable burden. And Taylor, I'm not surprised that you are doing this monthly for all spa locations. It doesn't surprise me at all. But, even if it's just for yourself, right, that you're not turning it into a corporate spa director like Taylor, if you're looking at your statistics for yourself daily, like I said, it doesn't really take long, and you can even have your opening or closing team fill them in for you with very little training.
Yes. I agree with you too. So that's absolutely brilliant. So Taylor, I don't know if you want to go into the chat box and let us know, because you've said you do weekend pricing. Have you got a separate price list, or do you have one price list that shows midweek and weekend? Just interesting to hear what you're doing on your side. One price list that shows both pricing. Amazing. And absolutely no issues. Did you ever have any issues, or do clients accept it now? Some locations will list pricing starting at, okay.
So like a facial starting at X amount. And that's another way to do it. I know that, at least in the US, there's a general acceptance that this is starting to happen. And I would say urban areas, like some of Taylor's spas, there's a lot more acceptance of this, or resort areas. Okay. But again, it is market by market, and some of it will be, understanding your competitive set, right? If you're the only one doing that and there's not really any major points of difference between you and the guy down the street, it's going to be really hard to implement. But if you really are offering, some point of difference, some unique selling point that nobody else has, let's say it's facilities, or that you're a bigger spa, or you have more prestigious treatments or services, or, overall it's a more interesting experience, you might be able to get away with it. So it will take, if you have an association with, which, many of you seem to, with each other in your comp set, it's not necessarily a price fixing exercise, but it's saying, is this something that we might want to consider? Do we think our market would be open to it?
Okay, that's interesting. All right, and then Samantha's saying it's difficult to get guests to accept an off-peak, on-peak pricing at spas. I hear you, Sam, but I do think that it's starting to become more globally accepted. I really do. And in fact, I think that we should bite the bullet and just do the two pricing thing, especially if you're at a resort or a destination spa. I absolutely see no problem with doing something like that.
Yeah, and I do think for off season and on season, I have worked with both, where we have both listed if somebody's doing, like if you're in the Maldives or Mauritius and somebody's booking a trip 6 to 12 months in advance and trying to book their services, obviously they might be booking during a peak season and be excited to know that the pricing might be lower, or vice versa. So sometimes you have to have both shown, but if your booking window is shorter, you can just publish the current price list, meaning if it's off season, you publish that price list. If it's high season, then you publish that one. So it really kind of, again, it depends, which is not so super helpful, but you have to know your audience. And, sometimes if it really is, like winter season or summer season is your peak or trough, then you just publish that price list and it gets updated, regularly. It's not hard to change websites anymore.
Amazing. Sounds amazing. Okay. Well, thank you so much. That was amazingly insightful. The recording will be published on YouTube so that it sits there in our YouTube channel. So don't forget, everybody, we are called Spa Professionals Guild. So please follow us on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We also have a YouTube channel where all of these sessions, all of these golden nuggets from everybody around the world, so exciting, is stored there so you can catch the recordings. And then I want to remind everybody that we have Andrew Gibson. So I don't know if any of you know him, but he's another champion. So Andrew is coming to chat to us on the 16th of March. Very interesting topic about making your mark or putting your stamp down as a spa director. So that's a very interesting topic for me, because we do find spa directors and spa managers, they want to leave their footprint, right? They want to leave their mark on the property or on the spa that they've been at. And Andrew has a wealth of knowledge,
he's an incredible man, an incredible speaker. I will be there for that.
Oh, divine. Yeah, follow us, Amanda, and then join to whichever sessions you feel like it. It will be lovely to have you with. So that's on all of this. You can see, if you're following Instagram or Facebook, you'll see every 2 or 3 days, we're publishing what the next session is all about. And then on the 2nd of March, I'm going to be doing, as a follow on from today's session, I'm going to take you through our staff module that is a part of our online transformational business course. So obviously we're not going to do the entire staff module together because it is about 6 weeks worth of work, but I'm going to take you through the 12 items that are in the staff module that sets you up for success, guaranteed success, when it comes to anything that you need to do that involves your staff in your business. And in fact, very excited, but I was chatting to a spa director from the Kpis group in the UK. I was chatting to him on the weekend, and he said something very interesting to me. He said that his biggest mistake he's ever made is focusing on the revenue. And I said, oh, what does that mean? He said, we should all be focusing on our people, on our staff. That needs to be number one, because the revenue the client services, the great guest experiences, the good reviews and the feedback. That all comes if your staff are number one in your business. So I love that. We're going to be flighting the interview with him in about 4 weeks' time, after I've done the intro to the staff module. So this all flows beautifully. So Amanda has set us up with KPIs. I'm going to follow through in 2 weeks' time. I'm going to take you through the whole staff module. Everything's in there, from personality assessments to how to correct behavior. I'm going to touch on KPIs because now Amanda's given us a lot of insight there. Staff checklists, opening and closing checklists. Oh my goodness me, staff huddles, staff meetings, running meetings that your staff want to attend, and lots more information. Okay, so we'll see you again on the 2nd of March and on the 16th of March. And Amanda, you have been an absolute superstar. Hundreds of kisses from South Africa and from me. That's been incredible. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks everybody for joining. It was really nice to spend some time with you today.
Divine. Can everybody go into the chat box, put in your checkout word? How do you feel after the session? My brain is definitely buzzing. And then you're off, everyone. Have the most incredible day if you're in the US, or the most incredible night. If Liz, have a beautiful sleep. Sweet dreams to you tonight, my dear. Okay, super. Look at all this lovely feedback. Great sharing. Learned something new, interesting. Stay safe. What a brilliant session. Grateful. Thanks, Amanda. Thank you so much. Enriched. Look at all those beautiful checkout words. Love it. Okay, everyone. See you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.